That's a really good reminder. I should actually call everyone who's on that committee.
I call to order the September 2024 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video and those attending in our boardroom or via Zoom. I'm Regent Kenyanya, will be joining us shortly. With the start of the new academic year, we have a new group of student representatives to the Board of Regents that we're excited to welcome. With us today in the Audit and Compliance Committee are Pete Smith from the Twin Cities campus and Natalia Useche from the Rochester campus. Welcome and thank you both for joining our committee. The first item of business this morning is a discussion of the 2024-2025 committee work plan. Vice Chair Gully and I met with Chief Auditor Galswick over the summer to discuss the priorities of the committee in order to develop the work plan you have before you today. The plan includes regular agenda items as well as space for emerging topics and updates on ongoing initiatives. Chief Auditor Galswick, would you like to make any comments about the work plan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Farnsworth. So I'll highlight a few things here that are non-standard items that we'll be talking about this fiscal year. So looking at the October committee meeting, there's going to be an update on some outstanding audit findings. This will be a supplement to our normal internal audit update where we provide information on outstanding findings. We'll have particular focus on this update on items that have been open for more than 2 years. So I have a couple of things planned for that. The discussion of approval requirements for engagement with auditors. This is in regards to, you'll see that there's an information item in today's document materials where we are talking about when we are contracting with outside audit firms, whether or not that we're going to have that as an information item or if it requires committee approval. So we want to talk about what those thresholds are and the rationale behind that in alignment with other conversations that the board has had related to thresholds for contracting and approval. For the overview of university insurance and workers' compensation, I want to make sure that the committee understands that this is about liability insurance. So this isn't employee benefits or student benefits, et cetera. This is about how the institution manages risk in part through the use of liability insurance, as well as providing an overview of RMINCO to give a little bit more background understanding on that. In the December committee meeting, an item that is of particular importance to the Internal Audit Department is the External Quality Assurance Review. As I mentioned to the committee before, this is a review that is required by Institute of Internal Audit Standards to be done once every 5 years. This is the answer to the question of who audits the auditors. We do get audited. We bring folks in. They take a look at what we're doing. So we'll have chief auditors from a number of other R1 universities who will be coming and looking at our programs and providing a report out to the committee in December on their findings. Moving on to February, it's mainly just the standard items as of now. There might be a little bit of room in the plan if any emerging topics come up to add to the February agenda. In May, there will be an overview of system-wide research administration compliance. I want to emphasize that this is focused on the controls and processes for the regular management of sponsored research at the institution. This is separate from research misconduct and some of those conversations on how the institution manages research misconduct, which will be discussed in mission fulfillment. I think this is particularly important for the committee to understand because this is audit work that we do pretty regularly in individual units where we look at how they're managing their research. And by having it discussed here at the committee, hopefully that'll give you a little bit more understanding of what are the types of things they're trying to manage. And if we find issues, what does that mean? The update on recent audit reports is a hold pending any additional if there's any other additional items that we want to add in there. But if we are able to hold that space, we'll look for a couple of reports that have been issued recently and try to do a little bit deeper dive on some of the risks and the mitigation plans. For the amendments to the Office of Internal Audit Charter, so we're doing this in the spring this year in part because the Institute of Internal Audit is changing the standards in January of 2025. As part of those changes, we will likely have to make some adjustments to our internal processes as well as to the internal audit charter. So I will plan on bringing those changes to the charter in May, as well as just talking through some of those process changes that we're expecting to stay in compliance. Other things that might drive some of those changes is related to that QAR review. If they see any areas for potential improvement, we may talk about some of the steps that we're taking at that point. And then in June, the one additional item to highlight there is a discussion on Title IX compliance for the university's D1 athletics programs. So this will be the Twin Cities athletics as well as the Duluth hockey programs. Just talking through what are the responsibilities for the institution and what is that changing landscape looks like. So with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have for Chief Farnsworth.
Great, thank you, Chief Auditor. Are there any questions or comments from committee members or any feedback? Thank you. We think so too. All right, with that, we will move forward to our second agenda item, which is an update on the university's enterprise risk management program and institutional risk profile. Here to walk us through the update is Associate Vice President Catherine Bonison, and please take your time and begin when you're ready.
Patience. I blew a gasket in my knee here, so I appreciate it.
No problem.
Good morning, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. I appreciate the time today. We're going to really spend most of our time looking at the refresh of the university's risk profile, which, as you recall, we brought to you originally a year ago in September to sort of reflect on the university's first risk profile, which would be different than the heat map that we operate under years prior. So with that, I'll jump right into the agenda. So as we go through the agenda, it's kind of broken up into three areas. Again, we're spending the majority of our time on this risk profile refresh and sort of how we gathered the information and how we evaluated the outcome to see if this makes sense. Does it fit the University of Minnesota? And then we're going to spend just a little bit of time on our fiscal year 2024 accomplishments and then what we're going to be doing going forward. And we're spending a little time on that just because ERM being a newer program, just to make sure what we think we're doing reflects what the board thinks we should also be doing. Before I jump into that internal scan, because I feel like we just jump right in. I realize you guys have so much material that goes in front of you. I just want to think back a year ago to the process that got us here with a risk profile that you reviewed. We actually had a consultant, Baker Tilly, that did a lot of this work. This year, we did not use that same process. We did a refresh, and so that's, again, what we'll be talking about, and that was done internally with internal resources. So the risk profile refresh, we started off with what we call sort of the internal scan. And with that, we sent a survey. And by we, I should also recognize my partner in crime behind me, Nate Widener, who actually did the majority of the work, who's our ERM manager, sent a survey to over 70 university leaders. And these are folks, they're not always senior leaders. It's folks who have some sort of responsibility in areas that tend to be sort of higher risk. But we try to hit academic, research, clinical. We cover all of them and make sure we get all 5 campuses. So in this survey, what we ask the respondents to do is to review these risk buckets, if you remember from the risk profile, which we'll pull up, and these are broader buckets, and it might be enrollment or political activity or campus security. And we ask them to prioritize them in areas of what do they perceive as sort of the highest risk areas for the university. And that's the process of that sort of risk refresh, so having them prioritized. What we did different this year, because we heard over the last year that there were pieces that maybe weren't quite obvious in that original profile, we asked people to write in anything that they thought was missing. And so that was a change from the original survey that went out in 2023. Our top write-in responses were athletics, which again, we heard here also at the board, so we're hearing the same themes, academic medicine, national governmental policy changes, and I think that's probably more focused on how that impacts higher education, geopolitical and global disruptions, and AI. We also, once we received our survey results, we also reflected on what were the impacts on our university campus, what events impacted our university campus in the most significant way, and do we see those reflected in that internal scan? So then we do the internal scan, then we look externally. So this first external reflection was more of a peer-to-peer, and so if you look at the bottom, we spoke with folks from the University of Wisconsin, the Ohio State, USC, University of Illinois, and Purdue. And what we asked them, because a lot of these folks won't just give you their risk profile. A lot of it's protected. They may not have it on their website. They may not even provide you a copy. But in peer-to-peer conversations of what does your risk profile look like? What are you seeing? What are your emerging risks? Through those discussions, we have two buckets of themes. The things that were not in ours that were commonly in our peers were, again, athletics and then health systems. So it's nice, as you see, we'll go through, these themes will be pretty predominant when we look at this next risk profile. And then the things that we heard that were in our profile, concerns around economic conditions and the impact on the university, and student retention and student experience. So then we looked at one more category of external data, and that's those more published reports that we get from folks like United Educators or Allianz and others that say, hey, universities, this is what you should be concerned about. And we do this scan because we want to make sure we're not totally missing something, that there's not something everybody else is talking about and the University of Minnesota just wasn't on board. So some of the ones that we heard in terms of current risks that people are tracking, Title IX, third-party risk, and then the ever-increasing regulatory and legal compliance mandates that tend to turn into a risk if you don't have enough folks and resources to get ahead of that. And then emerging risks, AI is very dominant, public distrust in education, and then the impacts of climate change. Okay, so with that, we'll kind of get into the more meat of the presentation. So this was the profile from 2023, and we just want to kind of anchor here for a minute so that we're looking at the same, starting from the same starting point here. And if you recall, these buckets, again, being fairly broad, but they encompass, so campus and public safety. It's not just about are there robberies on campus? It's general safety overall. So these are very broad buckets. And when you get into research, it could be research funding. It also could be safety. It could be rankings. They're very broad. One of the notable items that we heard from the original risk profile was the lack of athletics being present in this profile, and then the lack of academic health being present. So when we did the refresh, what we did was there was enough interest in athletics and academic health to be able to add those in as two buckets that were, I guess, missing in the first one. Additionally, we were able to put together student experience and retention because we heard from a number of our peers that they had also put those categories together. And we'll look at the next slide. It'll talk more about we don't like to use the word rankings because, again, much of this is perception of risk, right? It's not necessarily like we're going out and gathering the data to say, did we have more research incidents this year than we did last year? It's people's perception. But we did try to make it clear of what were the top risks by perception, the middle risks, and the lower ones. One of the most notable changes this year was research moved from being at the very end in terms of concern to going up closer to the top. So we just thought that was an interesting, and then employee retention and morale moved way down the list and kind of took the place of research. So there were some notable shifts, but again, the end size of the population surveyed, it's not huge. So we use this as a data point, not the data point. The other thing to note on this is we mapped the risk profile against Impact 2025, which we also recognizing we're getting to the end because we're almost to 2025. And so we're really looking forward to a new strategic plan, updated risk profile, and being able to mesh those together. So these are based on this year's survey, the way the risks sort of fell in terms of priority and in terms of perception. So the top risks being campus and public safety, cybersecurity and privacy, and political. I would have been surprised if political didn't move up. So it was, again, as we think, what were the impacts on our campus? What are people talking about? You also would like to see that reflected in the way this survey comes back. And then one of the moves, like I said, down to a lower level was employee retention and morale. And then everything in the middle were the things that were kind of grouped together where there really wasn't a lot of differentiation in the way people rank them. We did not try to push athletics and academic health into those rankings because we were trying to do year to year, and they weren't reflected on last year, and it felt like it would disrupt sort of the integrity of the survey. So if we look back this last year, some of the work that's been done in the ERM program, every risk has a risk owner. Not everyone's super jazzed about that because being a risk owner is a lot of responsibility, but We've gotten to that point. We were able to do some deep dive risk assessments. 3 of them have been completed, and we're working with those risk owners on sort of what does that mean and what do you do next. The refresh of the system-wide risk profile. And this is something I think is an ongoing process that could be improved. And as we work with new administration, new EVP, new president, we'd like to see, what those visions are and how they see ERM living out. And do we have the right folks at the table talking about risk and being able to weigh in on this risk profile? Because right now it's a very small group that we survey. And so how do you maybe bring in a wider group? Working through plan governance structure, and it's great to be at the board so often, so we appreciate the time. And then we have an ERM website, which we continue to refresh and update. Going into this next year, we're continuing to refine the process, and some of that, again, is with a new administration understanding what those goals are and how those will align with the new strategic plan. We're going to do another 3 deep dive assessments on the risks that are in our top 16 priorities. We'll do also as well the annual system-wide risk profile will start again in the spring and work through. And I don't know if we're going to do a full refresh. I think that's some of the conversation, again, with senior leaders of, does this system feel right the way we've done it this year, or should we rethink it? And so we're interested in getting that feedback. And I know that there are other voices out there we'd like to have speak to the risk profile. And so how do we get a broader cross-sectional view on the university's risks? And then we typically close with this slide of just a reminder of why ERM. And I guess the quick elevator speech is hopefully this is a tool that helps university leaders make good decisions, quick decisions, informed decisions, and helps us align all the good compliance work that happens and the good risk mitigation work in a way that helps us become more efficient. And with that, I thank you so much for the time, and I'm open to any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you for the very important presentation. Are there any questions or comments? Regent Talirabe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I just had a quick question. You said athletics and academic health were not included in the risk profile because they weren't there the previous year. But if it's high enough, how will it get, I guess, included in the profile?
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth, Regent Talirabe. It's a great question. And I think that some of the feedback we're looking from our executive sponsor and from working with our chief auditor of, is this something that we would want to build in to say this is a high enough priority? Some of the early discussions with academic health is that it might be too early for us to look at that because there's so much change and evolution that it seems as though we need to obviously be aware of it. We're all aware of it, but how much work could we do on it right now when I know there's so much tied up in what are the next steps and the next steps and a lot of legal activity going on. But I think with athletics, from what we're hearing from our peers, I would be surprised if we didn't move forward on trying to do more of a deep dive with athletics. It feels like that pressure and concern is growing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Gully.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about risk owners. Can you say a bit more about who is, when you're talking about risk owners, who those people are and what that exactly means or looks like?
Sure. Chair Farnsworth, Regent Gully, it's a great question. So a risk owner is typically the most senior leader, and to use the phrase, kind of where the buck stops. So for anything academic, it's going to be the provost and then likely the chancellors. Mm-hmm. And so for anything, if we get into like campus safety, it'll be the newly hired EVP. But those typically, a lot of that work will be delegated down to a step or two below to actually do that mitigation plan. But the actual responsibility is at that highest level. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. One question I have is you had mentioned, and then looking at the slide around risk profile categories, that, for example, employee retention and morale is in category 3, or it's moved down. What does that mean? That one stuck out to me because we talk a lot around here about employee retention and morale. And what does it mean that it's in category 3? What does it mean that it's moved down the profile, if you will?
Chair Farnsworth, it's a another great question. It's something that Chief Auditor and I have had conversations about because those are the ones that it's like it doesn't quite feel like that's where it should have been. Those were just where the scores were. And so having those follow-up conversations, I think with Vice President Hortzman and others of, was this just that there were so many other things that were taking up people's time that by the time they got to ranking, that one just sort of fell below. I don't have a clear answer as to why. I don't know that there are any other major shifts at the university that would speak to if this, then that. But we always look back as that internal scanner survey is just a point. It certainly doesn't mean that that risk goes away. It just, for whatever reason, was ranked lower by those that answered the survey this year.
And then another question, which is related to the internal scan. So we had talked a little bit about this in some of the agenda planning, but just noticing that, so it was sent to 70 university leaders and it was a 60% response rate. Do we, and maybe you're not the right person to opine on whether the 60% response rate was good, but maybe I'm just more noting that for committee members and others that I don't know if that's good or something in an area that we could improve in, but that's something that stuck out to me and maybe hoping we can see that increase a little bit in the future. And then the last comment for me, at least for now, is looking back at the risk profile, and this was actually acknowledged in your presentation, so maybe I'm just highlighting it in a different way. But being aware of what a new risk profile will look like as we work on a new strategic plan, understanding that those categories in the refreshed risk profile and our current risk profile and the refreshed one are tied to Impact 2025, and kind of being aware as we move along how bringing on a new strategic plan will impact our risk profile in some of the categories. So, and yeah, I know you spoke a little bit to that already. So, yeah, student representative.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, thank you, Chair. So I had a question about the student success. What does this encompass? Does it also mean like only student academic success or student personal success or with jobs, or what does this mean?
Chair Farnsworth, Student Representative Paredes. It's a great question. Student success is a very broad category. So it's not just your academic success or being able to graduate in 4, 5, or 6 years. It's about your feeling of belonging at the university, your feeling of inclusion. Are you engaged? Do you feel that your experience at the university is a positive one? And that's what that success bubble is. It's a fairly broad one. And so it'd be more of student life and academic life sort of together. And are you prepared to go into the future after graduation? So it's a much broader group.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. This was really helpful, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Let's see. Our next item is the information items. Chief Auditor Galswick, anything to highlight?
Yes, thank you, Chair Farnsworth. So as I was mentioning before, the information item is related to engagements less than $100,000 requiring after-the-fact reporting to the audit committee. So these are engagements with outside audit firms. 2 of these engagements were with Clifton Larson Allen. I think it's important to note that these engagements were conducted before they became our independent auditor and did not pose any independence concerns. The third item was related to Deloitte & Touche's transfer to Clifton Larson Allen as part of that transfer from Deloitte being our independent auditor to Clifton Larson Allen. And there was a small amount of fees associated with that, and again, did not create any independence issues. With that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'll just really briefly highlight, as the Chief Auditor did earlier, that this is sort of related to, or not sort of, is related to a topic we'll be discussing in October in the work plan around discussion of approval requirements for engagements with auditors, and maybe making some changes, potential changes to policy that would make these information items maybe look different in the future. So. All right, we will move on to our fourth item, or our last item, is to act on a resolution to conduct a non-public meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee, so the committee may discuss items regarding information technology security. Ms. Marcassani, will you please read the resolution?
Chair Farnsworth, the resolution is Regents of the University of Minnesota resolution to conduct non-public meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee to discuss information technology security. Be it resolved that in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.05, Subdivision 3D, a non-public meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee will be held on Thursday, September 12th, 2024, in the boardroom, 600 McNamara Alumni Center, for the purpose of discussing information technology security.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion is approved. We will now take a short recess to end the live stream and allow those in the boardroom to leave. Thank you, everyone. We stand in a very short recess to the call of the chair.